Welcome to the Podcaster Hour from Ecamm, helping entrepreneurs, business owners, and live streamers launch a podcast with success using the power of Ecamm Live. Grow your audience and expand your reach, and learn how to plan, promote, produce, and repurpose your live show and podcast. Here's your host, Ian Anderson Gray.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Podcaster Hour. Okay, that's enough of that. That's enough of the cheering. Welcome to this brand new show from Ecamm. My name is Ian Anderson Gray. It's my real pleasure to be here with you over the next few weeks. We're going to have a little break for the holidays, but I'm going to be here to help you launch your podcast from your live show, or maybe it's the other way around. I'm going to be going through all the things that you need to launch your podcast, whether it is the gear, the tools, the tech, whether it's the planning, whether it's the content, how you upload to podcast hosts and all that kind of thing. And I've got some very special guests planned as well, which is very, very exciting. We're going to be talking actually about the way you can manage the different audiences that you're going to have, because of course in today's show I've only got two audiences. I've got you watching live, and I've also got people in the future, the replay audience. But of course, when you're thinking about doing this as a podcast, you've also got your podcast listeners as well. So just to highlight some comments, because this is also going to be an interactive show, I'd love to have your questions. So if you've got any questions for me about podcasts, about live shows, about Ecamm, let me know in the comments. So let's see who we've got here. We've got Caleb is here saying, woohoo, so excited for this one. JJ Merrick says, I have a podcast, but don't do it live. Now, that's a really good point. So this is maybe one concern that people have, and I want to mention this straight away. A lot of people, when they launch a podcast and when they look at recording podcast episodes, love the ability to batch record. So you could set aside a day and a time, maybe once a week or every month, and you could book in, say, 5 or 6 hours or sessions so that you can then record for your podcast. You might then book in some guests. So you might be able to get out of the way 5 or 6 episodes out the way. If you do a live show and repurpose it into a podcast, that's not going to work for you. So I want to get that out of the way, because if you're looking to batch, then doing a podcast from a live show isn't going to be the best way of doing it. But there are loads of ways you can make the whole system streamlined. And I've been doing this for the last year and a half with my show. And I'm at episode 94 of my live show, but episode 94 of the podcast goes out in March. I'm about 8 to 10 weeks up to date. I've got about 10 weeks of podcasts under my belt, and I've not batched, but I'll tell you some of my secrets in a bit. Or GeoSynths, great name. Yes, I have a live stream each Sunday. So does that become a podcast? And Felicia says, I'm hoping to launch my podcast in 2021. I'm in the beginning stage of the process. Well, I would not be able to do what I do without Ecamm Live. Ecamm Live is what powers this show. Ecamm Live helps me with all the stages in producing my live show and my podcast. And there are some new features in Ecamm that I'm so excited about. Can you tell that I'm excited about this? Now, I'm going to talk about this in future episodes, but I just want to let you know about this. But the ability to get Ecamm to save all the different tracks separately. If you bring in a guest using interview mode now in Ecamm Live, you can get Ecamm Live to save your track separate from your guest on the interview mode and your sound effects. So for example, if I have some music like this, which is great, I'm playing this in Ecamm Live, this will actually be saved on a different track if you select this, which is amazing. So this is great because it just allows you then in the editing process to make sure that everything is separate and there are no issues. For example, I might have pressed the wrong button there, or maybe I want to repurpose it for later and I don't want to have that music playing. And with your guest, you want to make sure that you and your guest are on separate tracks. You know, for example, if you start coughing, if you have a coughing fit in the middle of it, you will then want to edit that out. And you can if you have those separate tracks. Today, I'm going to be talking about planning, how to plan your live shows so that they can become podcasts. Now, I'd love to know in the comments what you think about this. What is the most sexy bit about this whole process? Is it the planning stage, or are you actually really interested in the gear and the tools and things like that? Well, don't worry if you are interested in gear and tools. I will be talking about that today, but in future episodes, we'll be delving into the tools, the techniques, and all that kind of stuff that you need. So I mentioned that batching is a bit difficult. So this is the way I do it, just to explain, because with a podcast recording, you can schedule that whenever you want. So if you have a guest, you basically give them a calendar link and they can choose whenever is free in your calendar. Now, with a live show, you can't really do that. It's a good idea to have the same time every week. But this is what I do, and this has worked really, really well. So I do my live show twice per week. On a Tuesday, I do it at 11 a.m. in the UK. Now, that time is perfect for people on the whole in the UK and also in Europe and Australia. If I have any guests from Australia or the UK or Europe, that works really, really well for them. Now, I also do my live show Thursdays at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, which is really good, again, for the people in the UK, but also really good for people in the US as well. It's a little bit early for Pacific. It's 8 a.m. like it is today, but it works really well. And I find that I haven't yet had a guest that can't do one of those times. It just means that I have to maybe book in advance for some of the guests who are very, very busy. But on the whole, it works really well. Now, for the odd time, so I do have one or two guests coming in the future that can never do those times. For those situations, what I'd recommend is just do a special. So there's one guest that I want to have on my show, and he can only do Wednesday afternoons for me. So why not then just do a special for that person? Try not to do that regularly, but just for the odd one, then I think that works really well. We've got Ludmil watching from Bulgaria, Southeastern Europe. Bulgaria is a place that I would love to go to. So I can see a question. Nadim says, what's the idea to have a podcast, since if we can go live, sound and picture can give us why it's different? So I'm trying to understand your question there, but I think you're asking what's the point in having a podcast, in the sense that people can just watch your live show, or they could just have it in the background and listen to it. Well, there's a big reason for this. I hate to say this, okay, but not everyone loves live video. I love live video. I'm sure all of you love live video, but if you also release your show as a podcast, you're opening up you and your content to another audience out there that loves podcasting but doesn't necessarily love live video. And actually, some people love both, but they don't always have the opportunity to watch live. Now, I'm a case in point here, in that I love live video, but I don't always get the chance to watch everyone live. If I'm driving, I can't watch a live show while I'm driving. So podcasting is great. So you can turn your live shows into a podcast as well and open it up to a whole other audience. And you can put it on all the different channels out there. So I'm going to be talking to you about how you can do that, how you can put it on Apple Podcasts and how you can put it on all the other different channels, how you can also get it on your blog, on your website, and expand your reach and your audience that way. Let's have a look. We've got a question from Melanie. How can you go live on Anchor? I've only ever seen pre-recorded. So what I recommend there is to use Anchor as a podcast host. So you go live on Facebook or YouTube or Periscope or all of them, and then you take the audio from that, turn it into a podcast. So I'll be talking about that today, how you do that. You extract the audio. You can either just bung it on straight away, or you can do certain things like adding a beginning and an end and do some editing. But then you would upload it onto Anchor and do it that way. Use Anchor as a host. So yeah, do keep the questions coming. Brian says, I thought with podcast servers that every podcast essentially wasn't live. How is the podcast live, or are you only talking live on YouTube and then hosted platforms like Anchor? You can have live podcasts, but I'm talking about doing it live first of all as a live video, and then taking the audio from that, maybe doing some editing, and then uploading that to podcast hosts. There we go. John says, are you sitting or standing? What do you prefer when doing your podcast? Great question, John. I love to stand. And I would recommend this for pretty much everyone, unless you have back problems or you have issues standing. I think standing just gives you more energy, particularly for live, because the camera is a bit of an energy sucking device, can suck all that energy out of you. So if you stand, it helps you with your posture, it helps you with your breathing, helps you with your voice. So whether it's live or it's for podcast, I do think standing is better, but you just have to work out what's best for you. You might find that standing, you get really, really tired. You might be uncomfortable doing it that way. I mean, I'm a big believer in, I've got a standing mat, which is great. It gives me some cushioning as well. So I hope that helps. Yuan says, are you broadcasting to a podcast platform live? Have I already answered that question? No, it was a very similar question before, but we're doing it live and then uploading afterwards. Remember to put the letter Q beforehand so I can see them. Melanie says, I have a co-host who hates hearing herself and refuses to go live. I'm thinking I might go solo. Melanie, that's a really common problem. And I'm going to be honest with you. I used to really hate listening to myself. I still don't love it, but I'm a lot better now than I used to be. So really, this might be difficult for you to help your co-host with this. But the thing is, we're just not used to listening to ourselves the way other people do. So when you then go back and listen to yourself, you're listening to it externally. Because when I'm speaking at the moment, I can hear myself. I'm hearing it in a very different way to the way you're hearing it. So it takes time to get over that. Yeah, maybe just start off as a solo and do it that way. Mikhail says, which platform do you prefer? So is this like live platforms or podcasting platforms? I mean, really, the answer for me is it's really hard to answer that. Just like, I love so much of them. YouTube, Facebook, Periscope, a lot of them. I mean, I focus mainly on Facebook and YouTube, a little bit on LinkedIn and Periscope as well. I don't know if that was the answer you were looking for. African Father in America says, question, how often do you go live as a podcaster? For me, I go live twice per week. I would certainly recommend you going live once per week at least. That's for the consistency. For the podcast, I would recommend uploading or publishing your podcast once every week. That will give you consistency. It will also allow your audience to get into that rhythm, to know that you are going to go publishing it every week. That's really important because if it's every 2 weeks, your audience aren't going to necessarily know which week it's coming out. And there's evidence shows, there's a lot of research in that if you do your podcast every week, your growth in terms of audience is going to increase. So I'd definitely say go live once per week at least and do your podcast once per week. You need to be able to do it at a frequency that you can cope with, though, of course, because you've got to take the audio of your live show and turn it into the podcast. So there's a little bit of work that goes into that. It's not that difficult, but obviously you need to be able to have the time to be able to do that. So I hope that helps. For people just getting started, I recommend using a USB microphone, something like this. This is the Samson Q2U microphone. It is USB and XLR. But I really recommend this. It costs under $100. It is a dynamic microphone. It's really, really nice. And I always recommend, or most of the time recommend, dynamic microphones because it picks up your voice really well, but it doesn't pick up background noise in your room so much. So these work really, really well. It's USB, so you can plug it directly into your computer. You don't need any mixer. You don't need any sound interface or that kind of thing. I have a Heil PR40 microphone, beloved by podcasters around the world. It's a beautiful microphone. It's not cheap. It costs over $300, but it's a really lovely microphone. For me, it works really well for me. It's a personal choice. But this has an XLR output. So you can't plug this directly into your computer. You need a sound interface. And so the sound interface I've got is made by Focusrite. It's the Scarlett 2i2. So that would be the one I'd recommend, the Scarlett 2i2 or the Scarlett Solo. Those are really, really nice interfaces if you have a microphone that doesn't have USB. So that's the next level. So I hope that helps. Geosim says, my stream is 1.5 hours long. Do you recommend editing it down to a much shorter episode, say 30 minutes? Really good question. And unfortunately, my answer is it kind of depends. So there are podcast episodes out there that are 1.5 hours long, 2 hours long, even 3 hours long. In fact, I actually listen to some of those because they are uncut, they are raw. But it kind of depends. And we're going to be talking about this because on your live show, there will be some elements of your live show that don't translate very well or repurpose very well over into a podcast. For example, if you're spending a lot of time on visual stuff or with your live viewers, such as I am at the moment, and this show's not being turned into a podcast, but I would need to be very careful. I'd need to be a lot more thinking about my podcast audience while I'm answering your questions. So you need to think about that. How would it work? It's not necessarily the length that matters. 1.5 hours of amazing content and really raw and authentic stuff can be really, really amazing for your podcast listeners. They may really love that. Best podcast platform. For my old podcast, I hosted the MP3 on Amazon AWS, that's S3, and the RSS on my WordPress site. If someone has the know-how how to do that, is that the best option? So Matt, I'm going to be talking about all of this on this show. I'm actually going to be interviewing somebody from a podcast host in one of the later episodes of this, but that's a really good question. Now, when I had a podcast about 8 or 9 years ago, and I did something similar to you. I actually used SoundCloud back in the day as my podcast host. I certainly wouldn't recommend that now because, I mean, nothing against SoundCloud, but it's not a podcast host. And I think you could do what you're doing there, but things have moved on quite a bit. So I was thinking about doing the same thing when I launched my podcast nearly 2 years ago. I was going to put it on a podcast host and then host the RSS feed. And if you don't understand, anyone else doesn't understand what I'm talking about here, don't worry, I will explain. So basically the RSS feed, this is the podcast feed. This is what all, like, for example, Apple Podcasts and all the other podcast hosts, that's what they need. They need a feed of all your shows. So where do you create that feed? It used to be like the way to do it would be to put it on your WordPress website and to get that to host it. These days, I don't think that's the best way of doing it. It's better to use a dedicated podcast host that will do all of that for you, that will host and maintain that feed for you. For me, the one that I use is Captivate FM. It's a relatively new podcast host, but I'm totally in love with it. And if you're an Ecamm fan, I think it's kind of almost like the Ecamm of the podcast host world. But I'm well aware that when it comes to podcast hosting, everyone has their own favorite. That's my favorite, but do your research and look at other ones. The reason I love Captivate FM is because it's so easy to use and so powerful. So if you want to get your podcast on all the platforms, on Google, on Apple Podcasts, I forget all of them actually. There's so many of them out there. TuneIn, isn't it? Yeah, TuneIn Radio. It does it all for you there. So yeah, Matt, that's what I do. Keep the questions coming. I can see loads more questions, but I think it's time just to talk a little bit more about podcasting and about how you plan your show, because that's what we're going to be talking about today. Right? Hopefully this is going to work okay. Yes, it is. I think you can all see that. Live video and podcasting. What are the advantages? I think, first of all, it builds a more intimate experience than pre-recorded stuff. So live video is amazing in that it's getting you in front of the screen. It's much more intimate. Your audience can see you. They can see all your foibles. They can see you maybe stumbling over your words. And that's cool because they're getting to know you, the real you. So live video is really intimate. But do you know what? Podcasting is really intimate too, because people are plugging you, not physically, but plugging you into their ears. And not just for 5 minutes. On average, the listeners to your podcast will listen all the way through your podcast. Even if it is an hour long, your most passionate listeners are going to be plugging you into their ears for the whole time you create that content. Isn't that amazing? So you've got your live video where you can get in front of the camera and you can communicate with your audience visually, but you can then repurpose that into a podcast and have that real intimate experience with your audience. It's amazing. And that's one of the reasons why I love it. Really creates that emotional human connection. Empathy is such a strong emotion, and authenticity is also really, really important. One of the other things I talk about a lot of the time is heightened authenticity. That's really important. It's to be you, to be authentic, but to put a little bit more energy into it as well. And part of that, yes, it's to do with your voice and to do with how you deliver it, but it's also to do with the tech as well, and particularly the microphone and the audio gear that you have. I think that's really important to have a setup that delivers that authenticity. live video and podcasting allows viewers exclusive access to you, particularly live video, because obviously, like we're doing today, you're asking questions and I'm able to answer that. But even on a podcast, although it's pre-recorded, you can still bring in comments over time, which is great. They're great for those education question and answer sessions, expanding your reach. And this is why I believe passionately, as well as having a live video show, having a podcast expands your reach to an audience that wouldn't normally watch you because, for example, they're not into live video. Maybe they're not even on Facebook or YouTube, but they listen in the car, listen while they're doing the washing up. Think about that. It's great to share those live events, not so much podcasts, but definitely something to think about in terms of your live show. And this is a big one for me, it allows you to create that content much more quickly and easily. So podcasting is great in that you can just create that content quickly and easy, but blogging takes a lot more time and effort. So what I love about going live on a regular show is from that one live show, I can turn that into a blog. I can also turn it into a podcast and I can upload onto YouTube. Yes, it takes me a bit of time to research it and plan ahead, but from that one live show, I am reaching all these different audiences. I'm creating content across all these different platforms. Does that excite you? From that one live show, you can create a blog, you can create a podcast. It is amazing. Let me know in the comments what you think about that, because I think that is really, really powerful. Let's talk about planning. I'm going to talk about gear and all those kind of things. I can see we've got some questions about recording and all that kind of stuff. I will be talking about the tech another time. This bit today is, I think a lot of people think this is the boring bit, but this is absolutely vital. If you do not plan, then you're going to struggle to launch your podcast. You really will. You'll struggle to launch your live show. You won't know why you're doing it. There may come a time, and this is important, there may come a time 15 episodes in or 20 episodes in when you start to feel like giving up, because it's not all easy. Launching a live show, launching a podcast is not all plain sailing. There's going to be times when you're wanting to give up. This will not happen as much if you plan in advance, if you know why you're doing it, if you know who your audience is, if you have everything in place at the start. This is going to help you be much more successful and be consistent. So I want you to stick with me on this one because it is really important. Let's focus first of all on you and what I call the confident live mindset. This is whether you're doing live or whether you're doing a podcast or whether you're doing both. So it's really important to put forward your strengths and your personality and to tell your story. I mean, yes, it's important to be delivering value, but you also want to be telling your story. That's what I'm going to be doing through these live shows, is tell you my story, my experience, the struggles that I have had and the things that I have learned. Be professional, obviously. We'll talk about the opposite side of that in a minute. Become an authority. But as Luria Petrucci says,
that is uniquely you.
Be yourself. Lean into your flaws, because it's those bits that make you special. Make sure you answer people's questions on your live shows and on your podcasts. But have some fun. Be yourself. Don't make it all boring. Have some fun with those things. Think of your audience. And in a bit, I'm going to be talking to you about the 3 different audiences that you need to think about when you're doing this. This takes a bit of time and practice to think about those 3 audiences. Let me know in the comments if you can guess what those 3 audiences are. Now, this is a bit tricky because on a live show, there is this balance between thinking about your audience in the plural. So I can see at the moment we've got lots of people, we've got over 70 people watching live, which is awesome. And there's a real party atmosphere, a real community aspect to that, which is great. On a podcast, though, it's different because on a podcast, it's a much more intimate experience. People are plugging you into their ears and you want to talk to your audience in the singular. So there's a balance. And the way I do it is I'm very, very clear at the beginning of my live shows that this is a live show. So the podcast is a recording of a live show. So there is a live audience there watching. Now, I think my podcast listeners are totally fine with that. But when I'm talking to my live audience, I'm talking in the plural. But I will also say, and if you're listening to the podcast, thank you so much for listening to this. Let me know what you think about this. And it's probably an advantage in the English language that you singular and you plural are the same word. But thinking about it in my head, I'm thinking in the singular when I'm talking to my podcast listener. I think that's really important, particularly when it comes to your podcast. You want to think about speaking to your audience as one person. Really get personal there. So I'll go talk a little bit more about that in a bit, but then we need to think about your why and your what. And that brings me on to, let me just go onto my other screen here, the show plan. So I'd love it if you could start creating this. And I'd love to know if you've already created a plan, let me know in the comments. And I'd love to see it because it would be great to share this. This is my plan, and I've done this in a Google Doc. So I wanted to share this with you, not because this is perfect, but because this is a plan that I've created over time. Now, this has evolved over the last year and a half, but the basic nuts and bolts are here. The first thing that you need to create is a summary of what your live show and podcast is going to be about. This is really important because you need to know, you need to write down what it's all about. You also need to know, you need to be able to communicate that to your audience. And interestingly, I actually created a very similar plan for this show that I shared with Katie at Ecamm, and we discussed it and we planned it, and we planned what the episodes were going to be and who the audience was going to be. Now, this is not turning into a podcast, but it's about podcasts. So it's just something to think about right at the start. Let's look at this. So I've said here that this is for my Confident Live Marketing podcast and live show is a regular live show. I've said it's initially on Facebook Live, and actually it's expanded now. It's on most of the channels and podcasts. It's aimed at established entrepreneurs who want to level up their impact, authority, and profits through the power of live video, webinars, and podcasts. So I've gone through that's my summary there. Then I've gone onto my audience. You need to think about who your audience is. So for me, the show is focused towards an audience who are established entrepreneurs who have an online-based business. So it's not necessarily for beginners. It's for established entrepreneurs. They want to level up their impact, blah, 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 blah. And then I've got some demographics there. So it's in the US, followed by UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the rest of Europe. It's aimed at both men and women of all ages, but a particular focus on Generation Xers and older. So how do you know who your audience is? It may be slightly different for your podcast listeners to your live video audience. You need to think about that. You may have more millennials, for example, watching on live, and you may have more Generation Xers watching on the podcast. So just maybe have a think about that. Then I've got a little bit more about me. So write, what is it about yourself that makes you stand out? What is it that makes you stand out in terms of your knowledge about what you're going to be sharing on your show, and what makes you different? And this might seem silly because, of course, I've written this about myself. This document is about myself. But remember, there's going to be a time in the future, maybe 10, 15 episodes down the line, when you're thinking, do you know what? I think I'm going to give up. I'm struggling with this. It's not working. In those times of doubt, it's really important to be able to have a paragraph about yourself that you can look back and think, oh, actually, yeah, I do know what I'm talking about. Those times when you might have imposter syndrome. I think it's important to have those here. So I've got a little bit about myself, the fact that I trained as a professional singer, so that makes me slightly different. I have a different take on things. I've also a little bit more about my speaking career and things like that. Then I've got an intro and an outro. So at the beginning of this show, you will have heard I had an intro and outro, and this basically sums up what we're going to be talking about on this show. So you can write that intro and outro. Then we get onto the thing that I'm really passionate about and really excited about. And that is in terms of how you structure your show. You may not know, or you may struggle with that, or you may be thinking about, well, how do I create all these different episodes? You may struggle with that. Well, this really helped me, and that is coming up with themes. I recommend coming up with 3 different themes for your live shows and podcasts. So my other show, my Confident Live Marketing show, is all about becoming confident with live video. So I break that down into 3 themes, and I'd love to hear from you what your 3 themes would be. Theme number 1 for me is camera confidence, mindset, and presentation. It's that communication thing. It's the psychology. It's how we can get you more confident in front of the camera. Number 2 is the tech and the gear. So that's the more geeky stuff. It could be to do with audio, video, gear, that kind of thing. And number 3 is to do with the content marketing side of things. And this really helps in terms of bringing in guests and things like that. I can bring in a guest. For example, I can bring in a psychologist on number 1. I can bring in a marketing expert on number 3. It just makes it so much easier. And every single live show or podcast that I do is going to be about one of those themes. It allows me to be a much more intentional about my shows. So themes really helps. Think about that. That's going to be really, really important. Now we're coming on to an optional bit, which is sponsorship. Now, if you're just starting off, don't worry about sponsors. I will talk about this on the show. Sometimes it can make sense. For me, I did start off with sponsors because I had a good relationship with certain companies and it just made sense to do that. But for you, you may not want to think about doing that. Maybe think about that for the future. But the promise, I think, is really important. What is your promise to yourself and to the most important person, which is your audience? So I want to produce challenging and encouragement and practical tips on how to level up the audience's impact, authority, and profits, and to help with lack of confidence. I also want to be transparent and vulnerable with my ups and downs so I can share my journey with them. Then I've got also my reasons of why I'm launching this show. Again, that's really important for those times when you're going to be down and you're struggling to remember why you are doing this. So why am I doing this? For me, it was for brand awareness as a confident live video expert, to promote my products and build relationships with guests and sponsors, and also to repurpose to other channels as well. I would love to know what your reasons are as well. And Martin says, great to see you here, Martin. These tips are so pertinent, Ian. Thanks. I'm about to launch 2 podcasts to defined audiences where I'm an expert, Captain Career and the EMBA journey. I love that. I really, really love that. Awesome. And I'm very happy to share that document with you. I mean, obviously, you can see that on the screen, but if you want to be able to take that and make it your own, I'm more than happy to share that with you. Just one more thing on that, actually, I forgot about this, which is the format. The show format is broadcast on Facebook Live on my page using Ecamm. And I don't know why I've got Wirecast there. I think this is interesting, actually. When I was first looking at this, I was actually thinking about using a different tool. My goodness, I'm so glad I'm using Ecamm Live. So the way it works for me, I will talk a little bit more about structure in the future, but just to tease you a little bit about how I actually structure my live shows. So I go live 3 minutes early. I have a little countdown timer, have a bit of fun. I get some engagement in the comments. And then I just start with either me and my guests. We have 3 to 5 minutes, just informal chat. That's just for the live show. Then I play my show intro. So the show intro could be something like this.
Welcome to the Podcaster Hour from Ecamm.
So that is a pre-recorded video that I've loaded into Ecamm Live. I'm using a Stream Deck just to press that button, that loads that in. Now, at that moment there, when I do the theme music is when the recording of the podcast starts. Now, in the past, I've used Adobe Audition to route it out of Ecamm and into Adobe Audition. Actually, moving forwards with this new version of Ecamm Live, which has come out today, 3.7, I don't need to do that anymore because it actually separates out my track from my guest track from the sound effects, from the sound of that theme music. So it's all separated out. But basically, from that moment on, the podcast starts. So my audience is going to be my live. It's also going to be my podcast listeners as well. So then I go through right to the end and then have an end video at the end. And that's when the podcast ends. So I have a livey bit there. And the great bit about that livey bit is I can talk to my live audience. It's a bit more informal in a way. And then I can start properly there. I hope that helps. That's how I do it. And I will go through my whole process with you. Let's think a little bit more about, I've talked about themes. Let's think about other ways that you could create content that might work for podcasts. Not all of these are different types of content for your live shows. Not all of these formats will work for podcasts. Repurposing a blog post, I think, would work really, really well. So you might be doing a theme about marketing, for example. So I might have written a blog post and I'm going to take that blog post and talk about it on my live show. That would work really well for a podcast. An educational one, yeah, absolutely. An interview show, absolutely would work really well. And Ecamm Live will do that all for you, turn it into those different tracks, how-to videos. Now, how-to videos might work, but you need to be very careful about your podcast listeners. So I had Annette McDonald on my show a few weeks back. She is the founder of Easel, which is an online graphics tool. That was slightly tricky because she was going through how to create visuals in a visual tool. But we managed to make it work because as well as showing on the screen, I was always very careful to describe it for my audio listeners as well. So just think about that. I think that's important. Latest news could work well as well. Behind the scenes content, maybe not quite so much. That's good for live video, not so much for podcasts. But that brings me on to something I think is really, really important. And that is to think about the 3 audiences when you're doing your live shows. Now, do you know what they are? I don't think I've seen anyone put this in the comments. Okay, so the 3 audiences that you got to think about, and I have kind of mentioned this already, so you probably know what this is. So the first people are the replay viewers. They're the people that will join your live show first of all. So the people who watch this live show are actually people in the future. They're people from the future. You're not going into a time machine here, but these are the people from the future, your replay viewers first. So think about those people first. Then you want to think about your live viewers, the people that are joining you live. You want to make them feel special. You want to welcome them by name. And I will get onto that in a minute because at the moment I'm just delivering my presentation and the content. But you want to think about them. As well as that, you've also got to think about another audience from the future who are your podcast listeners. So you can see we've got viewers, listeners. That's really important. You always need to think about your listeners. If you're showing something on the screens, you also need to describe them for your live viewers. And that takes time and practice. So that just brings me on to final thing, which I'm going to be talking a lot about in this show, which is the 5 Ps live video process. And this also works for podcasts. First of all, today we've been talking about planning your live show. So important. But you also need to do that in terms of your individual episodes. You then need to pre-promote your live shows, but you also need to pre-promote your podcast. So my live show is out every Tuesdays and Thursdays, except at the moment I'm having a bit of a break before the holidays. My podcast comes out every Friday. So I know when those shows are coming out and I can pre-promote those on social, but also on email because I'm scheduling my live shows and I've scheduled my podcast as well. Then it's the case of time to produce your show and your podcast. You need to be thinking about that. I'll show you what I've done in terms of my process in Asana on another week, which I've developed over the last year and a half. Once your live show is out, it's finished, and also your podcast is out, you'll want to post-promote your live show and your podcast as well. And then finally, repurposing, obviously turning your live show into a blog post and a podcast as well. I think I will talk a little bit more about those kind of things in another week. So I think I can see a question from India. Did he answer best practices to have a remote guest to record a podcast? So I will be talking about this in the future, but I use Ecamm Live with interview mode. I will get them to book a time with me. I use Calendly for this. I will get them to come on to interview mode 15 minutes before my live show just to make sure that everything is okay and everything's working. Unless there's somebody who's not so used to podcasting or live shows. In that case, if we want to do a rehearsal beforehand, we'll book that separately. But that's what I do. And I used to use Adobe Audition to record it and some complicated software. I use Loopback to get it all routing in on different tracks. But now with Ecamm Live, you can do that without that. And then you can either edit it yourself. I'll talk about editing tools in the future. I think you're actually asking this best software to record audio with guests not in the same place and best way to bring them together. So if you're using Ecamm Live with interview mode, Ecamm will record that in separate tracks. Now, before, just to go into more detail about what I used before India, so I used Ecamm Live for the interview. I routed my audio into Adobe Audition, and I also I actually got my guests to go onto Zencaster to record their audio, but it became really complicated. I sometimes got echo. So I'm really excited with this new feature with Ecamm that we can do that. So this is from Chelsea, says, trademarking a podcast name, necessary or not? Good question. I think first of all, think about the copyright. Assuming that nobody else is using that name, if you've got a domain name of it, if you're using it on your website, you're you're talking about it, then that's copyrighted. So you should be okay with that. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so this is probably getting out of my realms of expertise. I have looked into trademarking, and I think it is a good idea. So it's worth looking into, but it's not the be all and end all. I hope that helps. Okay, Victor says, what is the best way to start to monetize your podcast, and at what point? Great question. We'll talk about this in a later episode, but I would say here that there's different ways of monetizing it. So if you've got a good relationship with certain companies where it would make a really good fit for them to sponsor your show, then that might be an opportunity for you. But when you're first starting a live show, your audience levels aren't going to be as good as they will do further down the line. You need to be honest with the companies that are potentially going to sponsor you and say, at the moment, it's a new show, the numbers aren't what they're going to be, but I'd love you to be a sponsor because I think it's going to be a really good relationship. I'm determined to grow this podcast and this show. You know, we can lock you in at a really good price at the start. So that would be one way of doing it. And also to say to your potential sponsor that they can sponsor not just your live show, but they can sponsor your live show, your blog, and your podcast. So there are actually 3 different audiences there. So Bjorn says, if I change podcast provider, what happens to all my old episodes on, let's say, Spotify? Now, this depends on the podcast provider, but most will allow you to redirect to a new host. So, for example, I know that Captivate FM has a really good migration process. They will allow you to get all your episodes onto your new host, and it works really, really well. So do check about that. It's a great question. Great. Let's look down, see if there are any more questions before we finish. Bob says, when I'm listening to a podcast, I realize that the host is talking to many, hopefully, people. I'm not under the illusion that I'm the only one. That's great, Bob. And I think you're a very educated listener. So, and I think I'm the same. When I listen to a podcast, I don't assume that I'm the only one. But I think there's still something really special about the host talking to you as an individual. I think there's a balance. I'm not saying to you never address in the plural or the singular, but I think there's a balance there. So do think about that. Here we go. Andrew Lunn says, nice presentation. Thank you. Thank you so much. Have you ever used Notion? I have, but not very much. That's a great app to help plan and structure content. I need to play around with it, Andrew. Thank you. Yeah, I've used a number of different ways of structuring it. I certainly use Asana to structure all the process, but yeah, I will definitely check that out. Robin says, how to use Ecamm Live for a Facebook watch party. That's slightly different to what we're talking about here today, Robin, but basically, you just go live as usual using Ecamm Live, and then you can create a watch party separately. So you would create that on your page, for example, and then you then select the live video to be played for your watch party. Brad says, is your live show on Facebook as well as YouTube? If on Facebook, do you live stream to a profile page or group? Great question, Brad. So I initially just started broadcasting on my Facebook page. Well, if we're going back in time, back in 2016, I started off on my profile because I was just playing around with it. I just wanted to play. The thing you'll get on your profile is you'll probably get more reach, more engagement if you're very active on YouTube. On Facebook. But I think with Facebook, it's better if you're going to be doing this for business, it's better to do this on your page because you've got more facilities. Like, for example, if you want to promote and if you want to do things like Facebook Messenger bots, then that will work. I do that as well as YouTube. I broadcast from Ecamm Live to Restream, and then it does it all that way. And I also do groups as well. So let's have a look. Any more questions before we finish? Robin says, never thought about talking about my blog posts as the way to repurpose. Yeah. So you can start off with this is the cool thing, Robin. So you can have a blog post and repurpose that into a live show that can then go into a podcast, that can go into a blog. You can do so much here. What I would do here is you're probably going to bring out some extra things from your blog when you're talking about it live. And you can then repurpose that into lots of different things here. So really, really cool. Brad says, regarding Facebook Live to a profile page, group, or some combination, or all 3. Unless you've got a particular reason, Brad, I would probably just go live to your page and not your profile at the same time. But it kind of depends on what you're wanting to do. And one thing to think about here is not many people know this and not many people obey this, but the terms and conditions do state that you shouldn't be using your profile for business. So unless your live is for fun and not business related, you probably want to just stick to your page. Not that Facebook's probably going to do anything about that, but I would just go live to your page. Now, you can go live to your group as well, or you can share it into your group. I wouldn't personally do all three unless there's a specific reason for that. Katie says, ISO track recording for the win. Oh my goodness. It is so, so cool. Felicia says, we are kind of out of time. But just very briefly, do you have a run of show to help you prepare your content in advance? Absolutely. I create these as Google Docs. And I create all of that. In fact, I also use a teleprompter. So I'll then transfer those docs onto my teleprompter. I don't have what I'm going to say printed out line by line, but I have bullet points just so that I know what I'm talking about there. India has given a super chat. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, India. This is so helpful. Can't wait for the rest of the series. India, thank you so much for being awesome. It's really, really great to see you here. Evan says, how do you even know how to charge for sponsorship? Are there guidelines for audience size, topic, etc.? That's a really hard one. I'm going to be bringing in some guests to talk about that. I can only tell you my experience. There's not really guidelines, but one thing that can help that Captivate FM does is they actually will give you a sponsorship pack that will actually look back at your previous episodes, give the audience size, and you can then give that to your audience, to your sponsor. But we will definitely talk about that in the future. Question. So from Rob Still. Hi, Rob. Hope you're doing well. For your presentation, did you create a new scene for each bullet points or use Keynote/PowerPoint? So yeah, I shared that in PowerPoint. I'm a PowerPoint kind of guy. I do use a Mac, obviously, but I'm PowerPoint. And I just shared that in a window. So I have this ahead of time. And that is actually PowerPoint there. So if I take away the overlay there, you can probably see, well, I don't know if you can see that. That's actually a PowerPoint shared as a window. So I hope that helps. Michael says, can you integrate your show into WordPress to stream? What I do is for all my podcasts, I'll have embedded the actual podcast episode, but I also put the pre-recorded video from YouTube in there as well, or Facebook. So that's what I do. You could integrate the YouTube live video on your WordPress blog. There's nothing stopping you for that. So yeah, I hope that helps. Feel So Alive says, would love to talk about positioning of layout. My teleprompter is an iPad with my monitor next to my webcam, so the look seems a bit off. Yeah, this takes a bit of time. I can maybe share some of my tech setup in a future episode, but I've got my teleprompter, which is an iPad teleprompter. So if I actually look down at my screen, I'm looking down at it now, but my teleprompter is about a foot above. I'm standing up. It works really well. Hope that helps. Rob says, cool, thank you. Well, we are out of time. We are over an hour, and it is supposed to be the podcaster hour, not the podcaster 65 minutes. So it's time to end the show. This has been the podcaster hour. My name is Ian Anderson Gray. I can't wait for you to launch your podcast from your live show, powered by Ecom Live. See you soon. Bye.
Thanks for watching the Podcaster Hour from Ecamm, helping entrepreneurs, business owners, and live streamers launch a podcast with success using the power of Ecamm Live. That's it for this week, but do tune in next time. See you soon, and toodaloo!